welcome back to another episode of KSP at episode 25. And our last mission was to the Eve and Gilly missions and contracts by landing on Gilly, deploying the Breaking Ground science modules, docking back up, sending docking back up there, knocking out the solar space contract and missions, and then returning back to find out that we are now on our way off to the Jool system, which we will begin doing in this episode. And the plan is to send a mass relay out to the Jool system so we can have a communication network able to then send a station out into orbit of the Jool system, perhaps in orbit of whichever moon that it tells us to go to after we complete the current contract, unless it tells us to fly out there and return from Jool space, Jool orbit, and a flyby of it. But we'll find out what we have to do at that point once we are done here. But for now, we're going to begin by pretty much sending that station core out now that I think about it, so we can knock out the flyby and getting orbit. As per contract, all it's telling us to do is do the flyby, so you just have to initiate the flyby at that point, and then from there we can figure out what we're going to do from there. But it might tell us to go ahead and return from Jool, so what we really should do is set this up to where we can take a vessel out to deploy the station core and then return from the flyby in orbit. So in order to do so, let's start off by grabbing the smaller of the larger two station cores and setting it to heaviest part. That is the, let's see what that was. It's the RC001S remote guidance unit. We'll start off by grabbing that, and then we will go to our structural parts and grab the, believe, FLA10 adapter. Yep. Okay, we'll set that to grandparent part, and that's where we're going to put a docking port at. We're going to put the new Clampetron shielded docking port like we have been using. Looks like it's actually large enough to remove this and put that directly on top of that instead, so that works. So let's place that there and make sure it's set to grandparent part. We're going to try to speed build this if possible. Let's then take a reaction control wheel, stick it there, set it to heaviest part, since that is the only one that we're going to be using there. And we need some power. Let's go down here and grab the Z1K rechargeable battery bank, set it to grandparent part. We're going to grab the Mark 1 crew cabin and then put that there. Auto strut it to grandparent parts. And let's go ahead and grab some lights, put those up here where the probe core is, and then using the two left shoulder buttons and the D-pad, let's aim those closer, more towards the docking port. Let's turn the lights on so we can get our colors going. And before we do that, let's move those in closer towards, so we can see the lighting a little better. Then we can highlight the lights. Looks like we're gonna need to move the lights, so let's grab those and move them to the other side, and then we'll move them in again. There we go. Now let's change the color by getting rid of the red and green, the blue. This is just what I prefer. You don't have to put it that way or even have any lights on it at all if you don't want, but we are heading to Jool, so I'm going to make it green. Alright, so that takes care of that lighting. Let's see, is there anything else that we're going to need to put from the utility menu? There is not. Don't need any of the cargo. Let's put our science on, though. Let's put we'll put this thermometer here, and then we're just going to put a gravimetric reader on the other side. Kind of limit the science because it's more for like completing science from the space around contracts in the future for extra cash. So that's all the science we're going to put on that. We are going to put some of these RA100 relays around this though, and since they are large, we're not really going to worry or concern ourselves so much about the windows on this. I'm going to move it over 3 spaces over from the center and try to see what 4 is going to look like. Looks like 4 is going to look good. We are going to make it a mass relay, so we're going to need 4 of those. We're going to set that to grandparent port. We should still be able to, if we zoom in, access that science part as well as that one. Good. Okay. Now the thing about this is we are also going to need to put some RCS thrusters on it, as well as another docking port on the bottom side and some other things. So we're going to put a structural tube on the bottom side of that. But before we put the structural tube on, no, we're not going to make it a larger one. We'll just go ahead and put the structural tube on. Let's go to our structural parts and find that. I'm not sure where those went. There they are. Okay, let's get leave the T12. Looking good. Okay, we just need it to be a little larger. We'll extend it out to the one before maximum size, so about that much of a size increase on it. Let's auto strut that to grandparent part, and then let's grab our relays and move those down. Actually, move them down to where it's about a hair above that structural tube, like so. That's a little better. Okay, now we need to finish up by grabbing some monopropellant fuel. Let's go down to the bottom of this and grab that. Gonna need a little bit. Let's grab the larger ones, and we'll radial for that so we have about 200 monopropellant. Let's make sure to auto strut that to grandparent part, and then we will move that into the crew cabin. Looking good. Now we just need to set the monopropellant itself. We're gonna radial for those 3 spaces over from the center close to up top here, and then do the same thing down here, which is also where we are going to put the other kind of docking port down below, like so, and then auto strut it to grandparent port. And if I'm not mistaken, that might be all we need. We'll double check just to make sure. We won't need any more of the command and control parts. Won't need any decoupling payload. Well, we are going to need some power, aren't we? Let's grab some RTG, since we are going to be pretty far away from the sun. We'll try to find the center of mass and put those there. Radial 2, auto strut those to grandparent part. Into the central part itself. Okay. Once those are in there, let's grab some solar panels as well, just to have in case. And we're going to put those, say, about here, radial 2, auto strut those to grandparent part. Then we'll take a look, looking pretty solid. And I believe that's all we're going to need. But we're going to put some backup communication devices on here as well. Let's put these Communitron 88-88s right below our science here, and then extend them and see what that's going to look like. Still clear of the docking port, still clear of the panels, and we can still select our science if necessary. I believe that's good. Now there's only one thing left to put on this station core / relay. First, let's close these Communitrons up, and then let's copy these lights and then go down here to the bottom and put some of those down here facing the opposite direction. Looking good. Let's go to our move tool, move those into the structure itself. Looking good. We are going to call this our Jool mass. Wait, no. That's not how we did the other ones. Let's go to OpenCraft and find out what those are. See, the last one we sent out was the CRS-3. We're going to call this the CRS-4. Well, no, this is also a station core too now, isn't it? It's an update on our last station core. It's a bit different where we're deploying it instead of launching it out separately, but it is going to be a KSS nonetheless. So we'll just make this the KSS 3. So let's go ahead and name that KSS-3 or Kerbal Space Station. Save that, save our progress on it. That's a pretty solid station core. Now it's time to build the return vessel that we're going to be using to return from Jool's Flyby and orbit, as well as deploying the station core. We're going to be sending 3 Kerbals out for this mission, but yeah, let's go ahead and put that on. The Mark 1-3 command pod we'll put up here. We'll auto strut it to heaviest part, and we need to put everything necessary for it on here. Let's see what we're going to need. Let's start from the bottom, go down to our utility, grab these drogue chutes. We're going to put 2 here set to radial 2, rotate over and put 2 there set to radial 2, and we'll do 2 more. We'll put 2 more there, 2 more here, and let's set all those to grandparent part. Once we are done with that, we will break out the larger radial mount parachutes and put those below that, like so. We'll put these first 2 here, set to grandparent part, and move those in just like we have with all of our other command pods. Looking good. Let's then also remember to, oh no, we can just undock it ourselves once we get there. But for now, let's separate the larger radial chutes from the drogues, and then place it up above the drogues. And just in case, let's then grab another set of these and place those. Oh no, I think that should be fine. We'll just leave that. There are no more of these that we're going to need, so we'll move on from the utility menu and go to our science. We're going to set this to radial 4, but we'll begin by placing our thermometer here at radial 1. Then let's grab our gravimetric reader, place it here, our barometer on the other side, and in case we need it, but we're not planning on using it, let's grab the seismic reader and place it on the back side. That's looking good. Okay, so that's all the science we're going to take. Don't need any communication devices on that, but we are going to need these battery packs. Place it in the center, 3 spaces over from the center there, like so on radial 4. Let's move those into our command pod, like so. And we'll grab the solar panels. Should be fine. Let's put those down here, radial 2, set those to grandparent part. Then we'll grab our 2.5 meter heat shield, placing it at the bottom, setting it to grandparent part. And I guess from there we just need to move up to our RCS packs by putting our RCS thrusters here, and then we'll put the fuel in. Make sure those RCS thrusters are set to radial 4. We'll grab our monopropellant, and we'll do radial 2 on the side above, or right on top of the windows, setting those to grandparent part, then moving those into the command pod like so. Looking good. Looks about like pretty much every other command pod that we make. That's all we're going to need on that. We'll move on to the actual transfer and orbital and return parts of the vessel itself now by grabbing the TD25 decoupler. We'll place that right under the heat shield, auto strutting it to grandparent part, and then putting a reaction control wheel, one of the large ones, beneath that. Auto strut that to heaviest part since it is going to be the only one that we're placing there. Need to make sure we're set to radial 1 as well, and let's also save our progress. Looking good, but we do need to strut those up now, so let's grab our struts, set it here, and we're going to set it to radial 8, and just let it grab wherever it can. Bring it up about here, close to as high as we can before it starts to interact with those relay dishes, as close to the center as possible, and just again let them grab wherever they can. Looks like that's not really grabbing a whole lot, so we'll just grab those and move them up from here above the solar panels and the RCS thrusters. Hopefully it's not going to interfere with our command pod hatch. Let's try to zoom in and then move up a little bit so we can get a higher point to place those. Let's see if we have better strut attachment now. It's looking a little better. Should be good enough. We'll just leave that how it is and then move on. Make sure to set ourselves back to radial 1. Save our progress. Now for the return vessel, we're going to need a good bit of fuel to return from Jool. So let's go down, and we're going to set this up as a Wolfhound stage with some outer staging. However, before we do that, we need to make sure to get our mass correct. Let's grab this docking port on our rerouting, and then we will grab the command pod to set it as the root part. And that should allow us to disconnect. Before we try to disconnect anything, let's turn our lights off so we can get a better view of things. Not sure why it's not letting us select anything like that. It's not letting us hit square on anything. It's unusual. Let's save the progress on our craft and go back to the Space Center, then we'll go back into the VAB and see if it'll let us do it then. Hopefully it will. If not, I'll have to restart the game, and that's the least ideal thing to want to do right now, because that'll cause me to cut the broadcast. Hopefully this fixes that problem. Alright, let's go back into the VAB. And the vessel should actually still be loaded up, but if not, we can just open it back up. So wait for this to load up. Should be loading up any second now. And load. Okay, there we go. Now, okay, we have editing control back. What were we even doing with that? That's right, let's turn these lights off. Turn those off, go up here, make sure these are turned off. Alright, now we can see how that rerouting worked. Let's see, looks like it worked out just fine. Let's first remove this and then turn this on. Now we can work according to the mass of the return vessel itself. And first thing we'll do is go back down here and begin putting the fuel on it to set it up for the Wolfhound engine that we're going to be using for the return stage itself. So let's put that on, then grab the X216, placing it at the bottom there. Make sure both those tanks are set to grandparent part, and then we will stick the Wolfhound at the bottom. Go to our engines and find the Wolfhound, place that and set it to root part. And we're at 35.58 tons, so that's perfect and ideal for that. Now, let's put radial to these decouplers around it on this side, as close to the center of all those fuel tanks as possible. We'll set that to grandparent part. Looking good. Now let's go back and grab these FL-T800 fuel tanks. Let's see how much those weigh again. After we put these on, try to center that on those decouplers and then auto strut those to grandparent port. Looking good. Those weigh 4.5, so we're gonna use the Terra engines on those. After we place those, we will set those to root part, and then we will reattach the station core back onto the vessel. Make sure it's set to radial 1 and then reattach that. Looking good. Now we just need to go back to our fuel tanks and grab a fuel line so we can asparagus stage these outer tanks to the central Wolfhound stage, like so. Once we have those, we need to strut that up. So let's go right above, let's say, oh yeah, that's right, let's put that at the center of the top of these fuel tanks since it is only radial 2. Try to strut those up here on the reaction wheel close to the center. Once that's strutted, we'll go down to the bottom of the fuel tanks and do the same thing. Let's put that on the center of those outer stage fuel tanks and then bring it down right above the engine, centered on that central fuel stage, and strut there. And as long as it's grabbing, which it is not, okay, let's try that again. Let's move it down as close to the bottom as we can, and we'll just zoom in on the tank and find a good spot to put that. As long as it struts up to the central stage, it's good, looking good. Now we just need to strut the top of these tanks like so, like we have in the past. We'll put it on the inside, try to strut it up not too high. Let's put it on this decoupler close to the center as possible. That looks good. Okay, now let's put it on the center of the outer tanks, as close to the center as possible. There we go. We'll strut it up to, say, right below this light should be okay. Let's see if it grabs. Looking good. Now we just need to place one on the far side of the outer tanks and strut those up as high as possible. We'll just let it grab wherever it can after we place it as high as possible. Let's see where those grabbed. Not ideal, but now we know where it's probably going to have to grab, which was kind of predictable anyways. So let's place that back on there and then try to place it down below the center where those relays are connecting. It will probably grab that light though. Nope, didn't. Looks good. Looks like none of those were set to radial 2 though, so we have to do them over. Let's grab them and do that again. Okay, so radial 2, put that up there. Looking good. Let's grab this one, place it again, and we'll make sure it's set to radial 2 and place it around the same spot right under that light in the center. Grabbed it. Good. Okay, now let's go down. Do the outer one, placing it close under here, nice and centered. And it grabbed. Very good. Let's take a look at the other side, make sure it's good. Alright, fantastic. So that's strutted up. Let's save our progress there. We need to make sure that terrier is also, or those terriers are going off with the wolfhound since it is asparagus staged. Let's save. Now let's grab, or we need to reroute this, so let's go up here, set this to the docking port, and then the root part itself will be the probe core. Then we can grab the probe core and move it up as high as we can get it, or at least close to as high as we can get it. Let's save our progress. 22 minutes into the episode. Might have to extend this, but I don't know how much data I have left to do it. But we'll keep going as long as we can. TD25 decoupler under the wolfhound. Set that to grandparent part. And in fact, yeah, okay, that's good. Now we're not going to be able to put a skipper stage on here. It won't be enough. We're going to set this to root part, then put another one, setting it to heaviest part. And this is going to be a mainsail stage. So let's try to max out our weight here with the Rockomax Jumbo. And then we'll place a Rockomax 16. And a 32 under that 16, I suppose. Let's auto strut each one of those to grandparent part. That will be quite the mainsail stage, but it's going to be necessary. That will be the transfer and maybe orbital stage for Jool. But we'll find out. Let's see. It'll at least finish the transfer and make the orbit around Jool. That stage will be responsible for getting us home after we deploy this station core, which we need to close the docking port on. Looking good. Okay. Now, let's make sure that decoupler goes off and activates the two terriers and the wolfhound and save. Now the fun part. Let's asparagus stage 2 separate TT38K radial decoupler stages here. Or wait, wrong ones. We need these, the TT70 radial decouplers. We're going to put those at the center of all those tanks. Radial 2, grab another set, radial 2 them on the other side. And let's set those to grandparent port. And we're going to build 4 more mainsail stages at max weight like we kind of did with that one. Let's go down to our jumbo, which weighs 36 tons, so we're going to put 2 of those on. We're going to put the first one centered on that decoupler, rotate over, and then put those 2 centered on those decouplers, set those to grandparent part. Now let's get some weight on this thing. Let's add 2 more sets of jumbos around the outer stages. Set those to grandparent port again. So that puts it at 72 tons. Let's add these X216s, place those there on the bottom, set that to grandparent, and then we'll copy those, set those here on the other side, and that's as far as we're going to go with the bottom of those, which in fact we can just copy this one. It's already set the root part, knocking that out for us on the auto strutting. There we go. Now we just need to strut this up and make sure it's all staged up correctly. We'll separate the outer stage separatrons, or decouplers like so, from the engines, making sure that all 5 of those engines are grouped together. And it doesn't really matter which ones we decouple first, but we do need to make sure that it is set up with our fuel lines, which we are going to go ahead and put on now. So let's put the fuel lines close to the bottom. We'll take the fuel line, the first one that we're going to set, radial 2 over to the opposite side for these, and we'll radial 2 more on the inner portion into the central stage. That takes care of the fuel lines. Now we just need to put some reaction control wheels up here, and then double those up, and then set the top one to root part, the bottom one to heaviest. Do the same thing to the other two. Root on top, heaviest on the bottom. And we're going to have to put a structural part and adapter on top of those. Let's grab that Rocco Max brand adapter 02. We'll place that there, set the grandparent part, and then we will copy that and place it over on this one. Now it's time to strut this thing up. Let's grab our struts. Start off like we always have, placing, well, since it is radial 2, we're going to make this easier on ourselves and just do it from the central stage. We'll set it here, set it to radial 4, and then place it on the inside of the outer tank adapter, and go to the center. Well, no, we'll just put this right here under the engine where that meets the Wolfhound. Looks like we're going to have to do that again, making sure that it's set to radial 4 this time. So right above the Wolfhound, below the Terrier, radial 4, set that as close to the center of that adapter as possible. That'll take care of that. Well, I thought it would. Let's try that again. Let's go down a little further on the Wolfhound and try that one more time. We'll push it a little beyond the center if we have to. Okay, that worked. Now, let's go to the bottom of the Terrier stage. It will be radial 2, but we'll work with it. We're going to radial 2 those struts to the outer edges of these outer tanks. Okay. Looks like it didn't set. Okay, so we'll just do it, since it is radial 2, we'll just do it from this anyways. Try to place this as high as possible. Say about here. See if it catches then. Okay, good. Now we just need to do the same thing to these, so they have outer strutting as well, but we need to try to get it in line with the struts on those Terrier fuel tanks. Let's put it right above there, centered. Looks like it's in line with all those other struts up there, looking good. Alright, now we just need to strut these outer tanks to the central stage. Let's find the center of the top of those tanks and strut it kind of right below that one. Oh, that's right, we can just radial 4 it and knock them all out. So let's radial 4 it from where we connected it there, and then find the center of that outer tank where it shifts like that, strut it there. Okay, that knocks out the upper ones. Let's place some kind of below that decoupler on the top of the jumbo. Make sure it's centered. We can zoom in there into the tank and then place it like that. And then to find a good angle to find the center of that jumbo and place it like so. That was set to radial 2 again. We need to fix that. So let's just grab it, place it right back where it was, radial 4. Do the same that we did last time there. Now those are set to radial 4, looking good. Enough, at least. Okay, let's grab the bottom of the tank now. Set it to radial 4. and then find the ideal place to put that on the center of the outer tanks. Let's go down. Looks like that's good. And we just need to connect those outer tanks together. We'll begin by going to the bottom and strutting them to the opposite ends of themselves, like so. That takes care of those two. Now let's do the same thing to the other two. And then we will do the side strutting. We'll begin by placing one here, and then finding the center on the opposite side and placing it there. Do the same thing to the other two, like so. Looking good. Now we just need to do the same thing about halfway up, so in between these jumbo tanks. Let's do that. Then do the same thing to the other side, and then we'll do it at the top, and that should take care of our strutting. Once that's placed, let's move up to the top, and we'll strut that from here over to the opposite side there. Do the same thing to the other two. Looking good. Now we're all strutted up, our fuel lines are set. We just need to make sure that those outer tanks are decoupling correctly, making sure that those go first, and then that these go after that, and then that'll stage into the Wolfhound and the two Terriers, and that should be enough. Okay, so now we need to set our launch stability enhancers on the center of mass with the outer tanks. Let's put the first two here, and we'll grab another set and put those there. Oops, those moved over a little bit too much, didn't they? Let's move those over. There we go. Looking good. Now we can just grab the probe core up here, set it to radial 1 first before we grab it, and we'll move it down into the ground and then push it up above the ground just a hair, like so. That should be okay. Let's go down here and check. Looking good. Okay. Everything looks relatively strutted well enough. I believe we're fine. Now we just need to take the engine, the central engine, put it below those launch stability enhancers, take the outer engines, placing them above those. The rest of our staging is still good. So let's save the craft and exit the VAB and set up our transfer window for the Jool Flyby mission. Again, once we get this thing in orbit around the Mun and then transfer to Jool and engage the flyby, at that point we're going to save, head back to the Space Center and check our contract, see if there's anything else that we should be doing, or find an indicator as to what we'll be doing, taking it from there. We have it set up to be ready to return from the Jool flyby in orbit, if necessary, with that return craft, but we'll find out once we get there, I suppose. Now there's Kerbin, Jool's way over there. We just need to line up our orbits now. Let's go ahead and start the time warp until Kerbin wraps around to the other side it's heading to on its orbit and is in line with Jool. And again, Jool has a lot of gravity, so it's going to be very easy to get grabbed and pulled into its system. We are approaching the edge of our orbit. Looks like we are right where we need to be, so let's cut our time warp. We are perfectly in line with Jool, that's good. However, the moon, or the Mun, needs to be wrapped around to where it's going to be in line with Jool as well, at the edge of its orbit, on the other side of where it is now. We'll just get it close to it for now, say about there should be okay. And we will leave the tracking station and launch this thing from the Mun, put it in orbit around the Mun, and prepare to transfer to Jool. We have about 25 minutes left. We may be able to extend it, I'm not sure. We'll find out. If it just happens to abruptly cut us off, I'm sorry. So let's go down to our new KSS craft, the KSS-3. And we're gonna get Valentina in on this one. Get out of there, Jeb. I see you trying to get back in there. Okay. And we'll take an engineer just in case, and we'll take our scientist just in case. We'll leave the Mark 1 crew cabin empty. Let's hold X or A on the Xbox on the KSS-3 and launch it from the MUN and get this mission underway. The longest part about this, honestly, is going to be waiting for the time warp on transferring to Jool, and then waiting on the time warp coming back from Jool if necessary, if we're going to do that in this episode. But we'll find out. It's time to launch this thing into orbit around the MUN, set up its transfer, and make that transfer happen. It's relatively easy because of the gravity of Jool, as I mentioned. It's kind of just like going anywhere else that we've been to in the past. Let's see, the time is now 8:20 Eastern Time where I am. Alright, now, stable, strutted, ready to go. So let's activate our SAS, throttle up, and launch. As soon as we hit close to about 50 meters per second, we will ram it over towards the horizontal line, or the horizon mark. About halfway there, let's cut that, and try to get it centered on the horizon there. Make sure it's at a 90-degree inclination. So it will raise up high enough to clear all of the surface, like the hills and the mountains and so on. So we build up speed to move our hyperwapsis out to about 50,000. At least 50,000 minimum. Once it hits 50,000, we will cut the throttle. Now we just need to wait for that to hit 5,000 meters so we can time warp. We do have RTGs on this thing, but just in case, let's go ahead and extend these 2 solar panels on the station core. By then we should be at about 5,000 meters, I would say. Okay, we just hit the 5,000 meters. Those are extending, so now it's should be safe. We should clear all the surface obstacles beneath us. Okay, yeah, we're good. So let's time warp one out to that 50,000, making sure to be ready to point prograde upon arrival. Once it gets close to 50,000, we will cut the warp, or you can just do it from the map for more accuracy. Say about there. Let it reorient to prograde. And if it's done reorienting to prograde before we hit 50,000, I'll just let it time warp ahead a little bit. All those reaction wheels are working out great, giving us tons of control. Well, it did extend a little beyond 50,000, didn't it? You can see when you're going to hit your max altitude by keeping an eye on the prograde mark on the nav ball. As soon as it touches the horizon, you'll be at the peak of your altitude, if not close to it. Yeah, about 50 seconds away. That's fine. As soon as this reorients itself, I'm going to do a little rotation too. I don't like it being off rotation. Alright, we should be about 30 seconds away from our mark. So I'm just going to let it time warp ahead until it's nice and close to that. Looking out for the periaps to pop out as we begin to circularize around the MUN here. And as soon as it circularizes and wraps around, I will cut, and then we need to zoom out. See, Jool should be somewhere out around here if we are lined up correctly. Oh, there it is. Alright, let's zoom back in, and then we will wrap the vessel around. Looks like the MUN still needs wrapped around a little bit too, so let's time warp the MUN over to where it needs to be, and do the same for the vessel once the MUN is close to where it needs to be. at the edge of its orbit in line with Jool. One more pass around should do it, right about there. Let's let the vessel reorient towards the prograde mark a little more, then we'll bring that target mark into the prograde and begin our transfer. With about 20 minutes on the clock if we're trying to make this a 1-hour episode. Alright, it's close enough. Let's let it time warp over into the prograde mark. That's good enough. As soon as it's locked onto prograde, I want to try to get rid of that wobble it's got going on there. Hope there's no trimming issues going on, but just in case there is, I'm going to hold L1 and hit the left stick in to try to get rid of that. Sometimes it won't show it. Deactivate the, or first I'm going to rotate to where it's nice and in line there with the horizon. Deactivate the SAS, turn it back on, relock prograde, and slowly throttle up to max throttle. Go back to our map. It's going to very quickly leave the Mun sphere of influence and then very quickly leave Kerbin's sphere of influence. We'll just keep zooming out until we see that line. Let it extend out beyond Duna. Looks like it's time to stage. Let's cut the engine and stage real quick. And slowly bring the throttle back up. Go back to our map. And keeping an eye on that apoapsis. Let's say it's going to probably extend out to about here. And that's when we should be close to getting our encounter with Jool. Looks like Elo is well out of the way. Duna might present a little bit of a problem, but we'll find out. Say if it was going to, I believe it may have already. So I think we'll be clear of Duna. Duna is on the 90-degree inclination mark. We are going to have to adjust our ascending node by burning anti-normal to get more on Jool's degree of inclination. Let's keep an eye on our fuel there. We're about halfway through the remaining outer stages. Hopefully there will be enough with this mainsail stage to finish this off and make our orbit of Jool. If not, this will very quickly become a rescue mission. We'll find out. We're getting relatively close to where we should start to see an encounter happen. Once it hits that line, we're going to cut the engine, highlight the approach marker separation, and bring that on in until those touch. There's our encounter. So now we just need to, before we do what we need to do, let's quick save. And then we will manually time warp out of the Mun's sphere of influence so we can see what's going on with Jool. Alright, so we are now out of the Mun sphere of influence. Let's focus on Jool. And then zoom in and see what we are looking at. Okay, so let's begin by pointing normal, I believe. Try to bring the periapse down closer to Jool, so we can get a good, nice, stable horizontal orbit once we get there, or equatorial orbit, sorry. So once we're locked on to normal, let's see if that brings it down. Since we are still under the influence of Kerbin, it should bring it down. Right, let's bring that on down now. Check our fuel. Have a little bit of fuel left on those outer stages. A little bit of wobble going on. We have to watch, since it is banging up the G-forces just a hair there. Looks like we lost our encounter a little bit. That's okay. Let's just point back to prograde and highlight that again. Once we're pointing prograde, we will get that encounter back. 252 meters per second of delta V left. We should be able to get this where we need it to be before having to eject those outer stages, and then we can use the central stage to make our orbit around Jool. Sorry. Alright, let's re-highlight that approach. And then bring it back in with the prograde and zoom back in. And just so we don't lose it again, this time we'll bring that in a little further. looking at it from the top down, that looks good. Now let's hit the normal mark and try to bring that down again. How much delta V did we take? Not much. Yeah, we'll definitely have enough to get this ready at least. And then once we get there, we'll finish off what's left of those two outer stages and use the central stage to make orbit around Jool. But again, as soon as we enter Jool's system, we need to quick save and go back to the Space Center and check the contracts. So now, let's try to bring that down. Well, looks like it's not going to really let us bring it down much more. So we're going to have to time warp to the ascending node, refocusing on our vessel by hitting the two sticks in, highlight the ascending node, and then we will highlight our periapse on Jool, make sure it doesn't get affected when we manually time warp ahead once. Let's take a look at it. Didn't really affect it much. Alright, so now let's go ahead and time warp over to the ascending node, and then prepare to burn anti-normal once we arrive. Once we reorient anti-normal, let's see, we need to put our focus back on Jool again, and then zoom back in. Now that we're not under Kerbin's sphere of influence, we can point anti-normal to bring that periapse down, or periapses. But before we do, let's close warp mode. As soon as that's in line, we will quick save or update the quick save. And then we will begin our anti-normal burn. Throat's getting a little wore out. Let's bring that down now. But along the way, we need to make sure that Jool's orbital lines are flush with themselves. There goes our outer stages. Let's throttle down, kick those, slowly throttle back up and get away from those. Alright, so now that you can see, here's Jool's orbital line. We need it flush with itself. And then we'll bring the periapse mark down until it's flush and right over top of Jool's orbital line, like so. And now we're coming in at a nice equatorial line there to make a nice orbit of Jool. We're going to begin by placing it out beyond Pole's orbit, because odds are that's where it's going to be sending us first. And we're going to have to take care of the docking, rendezvousing, and transferring between the vessels around each of these moons one by one. So we'll bring it in until it's close to Pole's line, but not too close so it doesn't get grabbed by Pole. Say about there. That should be good. Alright, and then let's update our quick save and then warp to the very beginning of Jool's sphere of influence so we can figure out what we're going to need to do. Let's highlight the periapsis and manually time warp ahead once. Didn't really affect our periapsis good. And we'll do the rest of the time warp automatically by selecting where it enters Jool's sphere of influence. And now for the long wait. It's going to take a few minutes before it reaches Jool's space. We can watch it as it's on its way. Here we are. Let's refocus on the vessel, zoom in. The debris should be far enough away once we're zoomed in to highlight the KSS-3. Zoom on back out. We are halfway between Duna and Drez's orbital line. And we'll make our way out past Drez and on to Jool at a point where it and Elu would be crossing both of their paths and their orbital lines. See, where Jool is about to cross, it makes it the farthest planet in the system for a little while, which is akin to a couple certain planets in real life, one of them being Pluto, which is what Elu is supposed to represent. So we are now out beyond Drez's orbital line. And we are on our way out to Jool. We're going to fly out beyond it a little bit, let it catch up to us. And at the apoapsis, we'll be at our slowest point, allowing Jool to creep in under us, and we'll make contact with it out here as we begin to speed back up, going back towards Kerbol, the star, and the Kerbin system. But because of Jool and our encounter, it is affecting our trajectory and bringing us closer in line with Eve down there, which is interesting. It's the way orbital dynamics and physics works. So now we are about to cross the line of where Elu would be. Were it here, we would actually have a good chance of making an encounter with it instead of Jool. And sometimes when you're trying to push out the Elu, if the planet and Jool are lined up just right in their orbital paths, sometimes you'll hit Jool before you can make it out to hitting Elu's encounter. The Elu's really not too hard to get an encounter with either, just depending on where Kerbin is relative to Elu at the time. Sometimes it's easy through here to make that point of contact. Sometimes it takes a little bit more if it's all the way out here. But again, if it's down here, Elu's moving faster. So it requires a little less delta V, if I'm not mistaken, to match its orbit. Or it might require more, I'm not sure, than it would be trying to match it out here. I would think it actually takes a lot more slowing down out here compared to being this close. Because the closer you are to Kerbol or your solar system's star, ours in particular is called Sol, hence solar system, but the closer you are, say if we zoom in and take a look at Moho and its orbital speed, as you can tell it's very quickly wrapping around at anywhere between 15 and maybe 18,000 meters per second. Jool, on the other hand, out here moving at like 4,000 meters per second, even as large as it is. And then you have, say in the middle, Dres, very tiny little asteroid akin to Ceres, out in the asteroid belt. It's moving at about 4,800 meters per second. And Eve, it's a little closer, it's moving at 11,000 right now. Duna, a little further away, it's moving at 7,000. Where's Elu at? Elu out here, way out here, only moving at 3,000. It's probably like close to 2,500 way out here. And we are about to reach our apoapsis, where we will be at our slowest relative speed to Kerbol at the moment. Once we pass that, we will begin regaining speed and heading towards Jool as it passes under us at a faster velocity, allowing it to surpass us and meet us over here. As we jump back up to maybe about 3,000 meters per second by the time we hit that encounter, I would say. We are now about 40 seconds away from reaching the point that we chose to warp out to. It's looking like I'm going to have to extend this episode a little bit, depending on what the contract calls for. Once we reach the point of Jool's influence and we are technically engaged in a flyby, it will finish this contract and allow us to return to the Space Center and tell us, or so we can find out what we have to do next. So now we are about 30 seconds away, maybe 25. Slowly picking up speed. It's looking like Jool is going to be coming up behind us. Let's see, we can see this bright star here, and this one here to make a triangulation on our view. Looks like it's those. Yep, I believe it's those. We should see Jool already, yeah, because it's so big. You can see it right above the mouse cursor there as we quickly approach the Jool system now, moving towards it. almost at the edge of Jool space. Quite the reach that massive planet has. And 2, 1, 0. And we are now in Jool space, and that's how far away it is. And it's still able to get a hold of us. So that takes care of the flyby. So let's go ahead and quick save, and then go back to the Space Center and see what the contract says. See what's in store for us next. After this locks on the prograde, I don't want to do this while it's moving. I'm particular like that, I suppose. Let's go back to the Space Center now. I'm gonna check the data that I have remaining while that's going back to the Space Center real quick. Let's see what we're looking at. Still have 2 gigs left. Okay, so I've only used 500 megabytes so far in this stream. It's plenty more. Could do another episode depending on what else is going on this evening. I might have to cut it abruptly depending on when a certain thing happens. So we should be back at the Space Center any second now. Plenty of time for it to load back up. Okay, it's starting to buff. There we go. Now let's go to our contracts. Before we do that, let's update our quick save. And go into our contracts and see what it is telling us to do now. Let's see. Anything related to Jool besides that one? Not seeing. Oh, there's one for Pole. Pole is the one on the farthest point, I believe. Has to support 6 Kerbals. The one that we have only has enough for 5. Has no research station, no ores, so we're not going to take. Okay, so orbit Jool. Go on an orbital spacewalk near Jool. Simple enough. Let's take it and do that real fast. Let's go back to the tracking station and get back into our KSS-3 vessel. I believe it's KSS-3, right? Or was it KSS-4? I'm not sure. We'll find out here in a second. After we make this orbit, we can do the orbital spacewalk and then go back to the Space Center again and find out what's going on. We'll worry about the debris off camera. Won't take up any time on camera for that. Alright, the KSS-3. We are heading back to the edge of Jool space. Once we get there, we will time warp to our, I believe, apoapsis. And we will begin to circularize around Jool, right outside of its farthest moon's orbit. And we'll see what we have to do after we do that and do our spacewalk. We're not going to do the rendezvous, dock, and transfer just yet, since this is technically all still the same vessel. It will not count. We have to send a separate vessel to do that, but we will have this mass relay station in orbit ahead of time at least. Alright, so let's reorient ourselves to retrograde. After it's done reorienting to retrograde, let's zoom out on the map here until we see our periapsis. Let's put our focus back on Jool too, so we have a better view of that. And as you can see, it is right outside of Pole's orbit, far enough away to where it won't be grabbed by it. We are now close enough to retrograde. Let's try to time warp ourselves nice and close to that periapsis, say just a few minutes behind it. So that's about 6 minutes behind it. That'll work. Let's refocus on the vessel as we approach Jool. Let's get a nice view. As it gets bigger, we can see the moon start to come into visible range. We are finished time warping now. Let's let it reorient to retro, and then zoom in so we can check how far we are from the periapsis. Now, we can get a bit of an indicator at what speed we're going to have to be at by checking out Pole's speed. It's at 1488. Alright, so how much delta V do we have? We have enough to definitely bring it down to at least 1,000 meters per second, so I think we'll be okay. Let's go ahead and time warp till we are about a minute behind the periaps. I think that should be enough time to do this burn. We'll find out. It's going to be a little under a minute. That'll be okay. Once we arrive, we will begin to slowly throttle up, and we will wait until we have our orbit at this point. In the meantime, we can go ahead and extend these communitrons in preparation for disconnecting the station. That way, just in case it needs the extra oomph on its communication ability, it'll have it. Looks like that's starting to wrap around a little bit on the Jool escape, increasing pretty quickly. Let's zoom out. Watch that as it wraps around very slowly and very quickly at the same time. It's all relative. Looks like our debris is well on its way out of the Jool system. It's already passed us up. Wow, that's from when we were still adjusting the normal and anti-normal degree of inclination, the ascending and descending node. It's just now getting here too. Cool. Alright, now we are very quickly approaching the point where that's going to wrap around, and we are going to have our orbit here within moments. We have about 600 meters per second of delta V. Remember, the closer that gets to 1,000 on its relative speed, the closer we will be to being out of fuel with this stage. Hopefully we can make our orbit. Want it to be a nice stable one. Let's see, 225 by 225. Let's see if we can make it happen with just the amount of fuel that we have in that main sail stage. We may have to... Okay, looks solid. Pole, you have a very interesting orbit there. But for now, we're looking good. Let's save. That knocks out half of our current contract that we went back to the Space Center for, which is making orbit around Jool, and now we just need to do the spacewalk. So, let's rotate our vessel so we can see ourselves a little bit better here. Alright, and then let's lock the SAS, and Valentina, you need the experience, so let's hop you out of the vessel. We're going to go ahead and grab some science while we're at it. But we're not going to do it with Valentina. She did her EVA, that completes the contract. Now let's get Bob out here to do the science. Alright, first things first, go back to the vessel by holding L1 or left shoulder button on the Xbox and using the D-pad either left or right. And once we have control of the vessel again, let's get our crew report and swap back over to Bob the same way that we swapped back to the vessel, and we'll grab that crew report. Then we will grab our EVA report, and then we shall grab the rest of our science, starting with the thermometer right in front of our face. Let's grab the temperature, and again, you can only do this with a scientist. Other classes cannot interact with the science instruments. Let's get our barometric reading and then take that and go down to the opposite end and get our gravimetric reading. 120 science there, very nice. Let's grab that now. Command module. Can't really do anything with that. We did forget to get the mystery goo and take it with us too, didn't we? Whoops, well that's okay. We'll get it at some point. Let's get back in the vessel now, and let's update our save and go back to the Space Center and see what the next contract is. Knocking these out nice and quick. Back to the Space Center now. See how long it takes to load up this time. See what time it is. 48 after. Still making good time. We're only a few minutes past the hour mark on the episode. Really hate it having to extend it so much with all these episodes, but we do what we have to do. Okay, now it should be loading the Space Center now. So just waiting for it to show signs of being buffed. There it goes. Alright, now it should load any second now. Let's go back to our contracts. Nothing new beyond... science data from space around Jool. That's a nice secondary contract to take. Anything else besides our main one? Not looking like it. So let's grab this one. Enter the atmosphere of Jool. Gather scientific data from Jool. and then return to Kerbin. Youch. Okay, this is going to be difficult. We don't want to dip too much into its atmosphere. It's going to be a little dangerous, but we'll take it. Alright, let's return to the Space Center and then go back to our vessel. Time to do something a little crazy. Let's go to the tracking station and get back into our KSS-1, and hopefully we can pull this off. If not, we're going to have to come back and try again. Alright, now let's get back to our KSS-3. Let's also make sure to classify this as a space station while we're at it. And close that back up and then get back in there. Okay, so I guess it's time for us to do a little bit of some crazy flying. We're not going to be flying safe. Have to beg the forgiveness of the great almighty Scott Manley. As we are on console, we are not using MechJev, and we are not flying safe. So as soon as this loads up, we're gonna set ourselves up for a little bit of craziness. First thing we're gonna do is undock from the station, leaving it in our current orbit where it needs to be, or we can looks like